stand up. Right. I am retired now and unemployable, but when I was still working in universities, one of my main research interests was in French education, and France, as many of you will know, has a long tradition of secular education. And it's very interesting being involved in education in England and at the same time studying the French system. And they're very interesting case studies, these two countries. And you could say that in France, they try to find ways to keep religion out of schools, and in England, they find ways of keeping religion in schools. And this matters to my own personal history because I'm old enough to remember when we did not speak of religious education. We spoke of religious instruction, religious knowledge, scripture. And there was no doubt that the principal purpose of lessons in these subjects was to inculcate Christian dogma. Justification for this was that England was a Christian country and children should therefore be taught the fundamentals of Christian doctrine, whether in a church school or a state school. This simply reflected widespread conviction at the time. All children were assumed to have a Christian identity, and the Christian religion pervaded the whole of school life. In my local authority county primary school in what is now the London Borough of Bexley in the 50s, I was told that God caused storms to brew up in the English Channel to blow the ships of the Spanish Armada off course in order to protect Protestant England. And I was told this as a matter of fact. This, more or less, is the consequence of the first of the two great education reform bills during the 20th century. The 1944 Education Act, which looked forward to the end of the Second World War and the post-war world that England would become, offering wider opportunity in education. But interestingly, the only subject that was prescribed on the curriculum, nothing else was mentioned in that great act, was religious instruction. Religious instruction shall be given in accordance with an agreed syllabus, says the Act, and the agreed syllabus is to be set up by an agreed syllabus conference that every local authority had to convene. And at the same time, in each local authority, standing advisory councils on religious education were to be set up in order to deal with the difficulties that arose from the different claims of the different Christian denominations. And the sacres, as they came to be known, are supposed to reflect local circumstances. And obviously church schools were allowed to continue to decide their own RE curriculum, or RI curriculum. Gradually, however, in that marvellous post-war world, things began to change. And we eventually, 44 years later, get to the second great education reform bill in 1988, put through by Margaret Thatcher and Kenneth Baker. And here they realised that, or they felt very strongly that the inconsistencies in subject provision in all subjects of the curriculum had to be addressed by the establishment of a national curriculum. So national curriculum programmes were set up for every subject, this time except RE. And Baker and Thatcher simply left the 1944 religious settlement for education, sacres, ASCs, all the rest of that apparatus in place, along with, of course, the parental right of withdrawal. But as time went on beyond 1988, as far as religious education was concerned, the dysfunctionality of a structure and a system of arrangement set in place when the rationale for the subject was extremely clear, to wit, the teaching of dogma, that actually began to be seen to fail, to be ever more anachronistic. And particularly, I would like to suggest the general public had begun, certainly towards the end of the 21st century, to be very aware of the inequalities in public provision generally, not just in education, that arose from this excessive idea of local determination and the notion of the postcode lottery. And when you think about it, the sacré system that underpins religious education and the locally agreed syllabuses is simply a postcode lottery. And this in the context of a society changing massively, multicultural in its nature, the growth of the nuns, as they're called these days, as people who have no faith at all, and a world in which religion is no longer an ascribed identity but a matter of personal choice. Here at the NSS, I think we felt that the height of absurdity in relation to this system had been reached last year when in the High Court in Cardiff there was a dispute between the local authority in the Vale of Glamorgan and the British Humanist Association because a parent had complained that there was no humanist representation on the sacré. And this position of refusing the right, as it were, of a humanist representative on the sacré was justified by Mr. Paul Smiley, who was or is, I think still, the chair of the National Association of Sacrés. I just hope that he's not here present today. Nevertheless, I'm simply going to read what he said. And he said this: membership of sacrés should reflect broadly the proportionate strength of the denomination or religion in that area. Then, in deciding whether to appoint a humanist representative to an authority, deciding whether to appoint a humanist representative, an authority must satisfy itself that humanism is an other religion and that it's part of the makeup of the principal religious traditions in that area. In other words, children in Glamorgan can be taught about humanism only if enough humanists live in Glamorgan. Now, this is nonsense, is it not? And this is the consequence of the 1944 system outliving its usefulness into the 21st century. So for us who are keen to promote this campaign of 21st century religion for all, the most important thing is putting an end to local determination, ending the postcode lottery, and establishing a national entitlement for every child in every school, wherever they happen to live. So we have 8 specific recommendations about the future of religious education, but I'd like to stress that this is part of our overall concern that schools should not be organised around religious identities or used to promote religious worldviews or engage in proselytisation. We do not want different truths being taught to different children, either because they're in religious schools or because of the arbitrariness of the sacrés. So, as the light fails, let me just go through these key recommendations which we feel absolutely crucial to the future of religious education. There must be a national determination of an entitlement to RE for all children as future citizens. The content of this provision must be broad, balanced and objective, and the provision that was in the 1988 Act that religious education should be in the main Christian, that should be scrapped. It should cover both religious and non-religious worldviews. There should be no intention to inculcate dogma and no confessional element of any kind. It should be subject to inspection by Ofsted, including schools with a religious character. There should be no parental right of withdrawal. If we come to a national agreement that all children need to know this because it's important in exactly the same way as we do with, say, mathematics, then just as parents do not have a right to withdraw their children from mathematics, no more should they have the right to withdraw their children from this objective, broad, fair The content should be decided by the same structures and processes as other subjects of the national curriculum involving a range of stakeholders, but the most important thing is that no undue influence or veto should come from any interested parties. Now we think that it is thought that this reform of religious education is urgent. There is some good practice, but most of the reports that have been produced in the last 5 years or so have pointed to the terrific weaknesses that this subject has for all sorts of reasons, some of which I've enunciated already, vis-à-vis other subjects in the curriculum. Just draw attention quickly to the Ofsted report in 2013, Religious Education Realising the Potential. The litany of criticisms here is just stark. Low standards, weak teaching and assessment, teachers here having little understanding of the subject, confusion about the purpose of religious education, weak leadership and management. And in the schools that they observed, in the primary sector, 60% were less than good, and in the secondaries, 50%. And Ofsted themselves point out the way in which the 1944 settlement of local determination is responsible for, in large measure, responsible for this parlous state of affairs. Now, there are, it seems to us, nevertheless signs of hope. Martha has talked about the significant research at Goldsmiths, which has resulted in the recommendation that there be a national entitlement. The same is true for work done by Charles Clarke and Linda Woodhead. The National Association of Teachers of Religious Education also are supportive of this proposal. And as already been mentioned, very significantly, the Commission on Religious Education set up by the RE Council of England and Wales. It's quite interesting, this is just a little aside, when Stephen Evans and I went to talk to the DFE about this, the officials that we sat down with came in with your interim report. It was the only document that they had, and they were clearly influenced by it. And this, I think this interim report, and we'll have the final report later this year, is very significant. It acknowledges the weaknesses of the present situation. For example, let me just quote, RE faces a perilous future without strategic urgent intervention. Low standards predominate across too many schools, including schools with and without a religious character. And they themselves, this commission, which carries significant weight, says there should be a national entitlement. And they talk about the importance of developing tolerance, sensitivity and empathy for the diversity of humanity. Martha mentioned religious literacy. I think what we have come around to is the view that it's not so much religious literacy, which is a very disputed term and means all sorts of different things to different people. What we are looking for is worldview literacy. I'd just like to say in closing a couple of things briefly about the importance of this and the importance of education. There's no evolutionary difference between us in the 21st century and humans in the 1st century. Our bodies are the same as theirs. We are the same as them physiologically and neurologically. And yet, it is obvious our lives are incomparably different and vastly better. And the difference is purely that we have better knowledge and better education. They were ignorant, they lacked reliable knowledge, they had little understanding of how the world actually works. The dogmas of witchcraft and demon possession were very poor explanations of illness. The germ theory of disease is infinitely more effective. And we need to educate children to understand the importance of openness and freedom in society, so that there is an open marketplace of ideas in which none are privileged and all are open to critical analysis, so that progress can be made. Children need to understand the importance of free speech, thought and expression. And they need to learn methodologies for distinguishing good ideas from bad ideas. Now, good quality RE, along the lines that I've alluded to. The recommendations, for example, of the CORE Commission. Good quality RE, whatever we call it, can make a very valuable contribution to developing just this vital, critical facility. So we're now 30 years on from the Thatcher and Baker 1988 Act, which established a national curriculum entitlement generally across the curriculum. And it seems timely now to press for this national entitlement to include religious education. The NSS, we feel and hope, is pushing at an open door here, although it has to be said, as far as the government is concerned, it seems to have its mind on so much else that it hasn't got time, perhaps, at the moment to take this forward. But as far as the community of RE professionals is concerned, this is something that does need to be argued for. It is time to end the anachronistic, unfair and arbitrary system of local determination and provide proper, good, quality education about religious and non-religious worldviews for every child in all our schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you.